Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Matt Wright, and this is episode 9 of A Climber's Mind. In this episode, I want to talk about something that affects almost every climber at some point: fear of falling, but not in a way it's usually talked about. Some people think fear of falling is a bravery issue. They think, I need to commit more, or I need to be less scared, or maybe I need to take more practice falls. And sometimes that might be a part of it. But for a lot of people, that's not the source of the problem. The problem is usually much deeper. A lot of people might be surprised to hear that fear of falling once dominated a big part of my climbing. When I first started climbing in the Peak District, I found the polished limestone was a real stark contrast to the grippy sandstone I learned to climb on. I remember trying to on-site lead a couple of routes, but I often felt really intimidated, especially when there was any sense of insecurity or uncertainty. I was constantly aware of the distance between the quick draws, or the quality of the bolts, or the possibility of hitting ledges, features, or changes of angle. And that awareness made it really hard to commit at times. The second that feeling built up, I'd grab a quick draw, or I'd say take, and abandon the attempt. And that went on for years. I avoided on-sighting almost completely, and instead I spent most of my time projecting routes that were way harder than anything I could ever consider on-sighting. Which might sound a little bit backwards, but it felt more acceptable to take my time on something hard than to feel overwhelmed on something I thought I should be able to do. And interestingly, that approach actually worked incredibly well, because I learned through familiarity. I'd almost never give anything a true on-site go. I'd work the route, work it slowly on top rope, learn the moves, understand the positions, figure out where I'd clip, where I'd feel intimidated, and how I'd manage these moments. And over time, falling started to feel okay, because I understood the climb. Now fast forward to last year. I on-sighted a route called Dalriada. It's graded E6/7, but regardless of the number, it's a highly exposed line up a huge overhanging fin just off the summit of Ben Arthur. It's remote. The approach takes a couple of hours, and if something goes wrong, it's not a simple walk-off situation. It's not the kind of climb you can underestimate. And what's interesting is that I know for a fact the version of me from 5 years ago couldn't have done that. Even when I was physically strong enough, even when I'd climbed 9A Sport, I wouldn't have had the clarity to deal with that situation. The difference wasn't bravery, it was clarity. By the time I got on Dalriada, I had a much better understanding of my movement, my decision making, and how to regulate myself under pressure. I could assess the situation, adapt to what was in front of me, and stay composed enough to keep making good decisions. And that didn't come from just forcing myself into these scary situations. It come from years of building familiarity through projecting. I remember feeling fear on the route. It was definitely there, but it never tipped me over into panic. It never became really overwhelming. I was able to stay controlled, move deliberately, and deal with the climb one move at a time. And whenever my mind started to drift, I'd bring it back to my breathing, back to the feeling in my fingers, back to what I needed to do next. And when I started to get pumped, even when things got intense, I was still able to keep climbing well. And that's the point I want to explore in this episode, because fear didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling how I climbed. Fear of falling is often misunderstood. A better way to look at it is this: fear of falling is often a symptom of poor clarity, not a lack of bravery. Clarity in your movement, clarity in your decisions, clarity in what you're trying to do, clarity in how you respond under pressure. If those things aren't in place, fear shows up. In many ways, I think it's like driving. If you don't really know how to drive properly, and then you suddenly try to go at 100 miles an hour, of course you're going to feel scared. But an experienced driver understands the sensitivity of the wheel, the brakes, the speed, the road, and the behaviour of the vehicle. They're constantly making calculations, but many of those decisions have become subconscious. They can feel when to slow down, when to adjust, when to stay relaxed, and when to take control. Climbing is similar. If your movement is uncertain, if your decisions are rushed, and if you don't yet understand the situation you're in, then fear becomes much harder to control. Not because you're weak-minded, but because your system doesn't yet have enough clarity to deal with the pressure. Fear is often described as irrational or rational. I don't think it's really that simple. Most of the time, it's a mixture of both. Because in climbing, there is almost always some level of real danger present. Ledges, poorly placed bolts, a lack of gear, or poor placements, changes in angle, loose rock, and even something as simple as your belayer not paying full attention. And this is something that gets massively overlooked. Your belayer is a huge part of your climbing system, and if that system isn't working properly, it can be a direct cause of fear. Not because the climbing is necessarily dangerous, but because the catch is unpredictable. A hard catch, too much slack, not enough slack, poor positioning, all of these things change how a fall feels. And if the fall feels violent or erratic, your body remembers that. And the next time you're in that position, fear shows up faster. Now here's where it gets a bit more nuanced, because sometimes the issue isn't just a lack of skill, it's ego. Some belayers don't want to admit they still have a lot of things to learn. They assume that holding the rope is enough, but belaying well is a skill. Understanding fall zones, how much slack to give, how to give a soft catch, how to read the terrain. It takes awareness, it takes attention, and it takes humility. Because ego has no place when it comes to safety. And if your belayer isn't willing to be objective, isn't willing to learn, or isn't willing to pay attention or take advice, then that's not just a minor issue. That can be a direct cause of your fear of falling. And this is something a lot of climbers don't want to admit, but choosing the right partner is incredibly important, because trust in the system is what allows you to relax into the climb. If you don't trust the belayer, you won't trust the fall. And if you don't trust the fall, fear will always be there. So in many situations, fear is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's trying to protect you. But there's also another side to it, what people often call the irrational side. And I don't think that's truly irrational either. I think it's better understood as uncertainty. Uncertainty in the movement, uncertainty in the position, uncertainty in the fall, uncertainty in your ability to deal with what's coming next. So rather than asking whether it's rational or irrational, I think a much better question to ask is how much of this is actual risk and how much of this is uncertainty. Because the solution depends on the answer. Now, something I see all the time is climbers showing clear signs of fear without even realising it. Things like clipping early, over-gripping, rushing, hesitating before committing, readjusting consistently, avoiding rests, even when they're right there. These aren't random habits. These are what fear looks like when clarity starts to break down. Because when clarity drops, your climbing becomes reactive. You're no longer making decisions, you're just responding to how things feel in the moment. And if your perception is shaped by fear, that becomes your default. You don't yet realise there's another way to climb. Now, I don't want to frame fear as the enemy. Fear is always there, even for the best climbers. The difference is, experienced climbers can still make good decisions when fear is present. They stay engaged, they stay aware, they stay composed enough to keep executing. Less experienced climbers get hijacked by it. They enter fight or flight. Their breathing changes, their decisions speed up, their movements become rushed, or they hesitate. And that's when things start to break down. This is why being process-driven matters so much, because outcome-focused climbing often leads to poor decisions. You push when you shouldn't. You rush when you need to slow down. You commit when the situation isn't right. Or you hesitate when things actually need to move. And often, that isn't really about the climb anymore. It's about ego, identity, and what the outcome means to you. You don't just want to do the route. You want to be the kind of person who does the route. You don't just fear the fall. You fear what falling might actually say about you. That you're not brave enough, not good enough, not the climber you thought you were. And when that starts driving the decision making, it becomes very hard to stay objective. But when you're focused on the process, you give yourself the best chance to stay clear even when fear is present. Now people might ask, where should I start? Start with diagnosis. Ask yourself, is there real danger? Are there ledges, bad clips, poor gear, or something you could hit? Is your belayer competent? Do they understand slack, soft catches, and how to read the terrain? Are you too close to your limit? Are you trying to solve fear when you're already maxed out physically? And do you actually understand the movement? Have you spent enough time in the positions to feel controlled and composed? And ultimately, are you scared because it's dangerous or because uncertainty is overwhelming you? Because that distinction matters. If it's danger, you need better judgment. If it's uncertainty, you need more clarity. And once you've diagnosed that, you need to start changing your approach. But this is where people get frustrated, because this takes time, repetition, consistency. Fear doesn't disappear instantly. If your default is panic, stress, fight or flight, that pattern has been reinforced over and over again. So even if you understand the problem, your nervous system doesn't just switch off. You have to rebuild trust, not by forcing it, but by earning it. Slowly, systematically, expanding your comfort zone just enough, putting yourself in situations that challenge you, but still allow you to stay composed and make good decisions. Not overwhelming yourself, because one big scare can undo a lot of progress. It can reinforce the exact response you're trying to move away from, so you have to be patient. This is a process, just like building strength or technique, just like any other part of your climbing. You don't rush it, you build it. And this is where real confidence really comes from. Confidence isn't a mindset, it's familiarity built over time. And this is why projecting works so well, because it gives you structure to build that familiarity. You learn the movement, you understand the positions, you experience the exposure, you learn to take the falls. You build understanding, you build trust, you reduce uncertainty. And over time, something starts to shift. Fear doesn't disappear, it stops controlling how you climb. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to remove fear, you just need to understand it. And when you remove the cause, fear takes care of itself. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who might benefit. And I'll see you in the next episode.